Color is a very powerful tool. It can speak directly to the subconscious, evoking emotions, shaping perception, and telling stories in ways that words never could. In today's video, we're not just exploring the basics of color theory. We're going deeper into how you as a storyteller can use color to capture the hearts, minds, and emotions of your audience. Colors themselves carry a very symbolic meaning. Over time, audiences have somewhat been trained to sometimes subconsciously associate colors with certain emotions or themes. Red, most of the time, is associated with violence, power, but it could also resemble things like passion and lust, like in American Beauty. These red petals symbolize lust and death. Taking the color blue, you have sadness and alienation. But in Moonlight, the ocean and the blue lighting during his childhood scenes evoke peace and longing. And in a lot of ways, it could resemble tranquility if you look at a big, beautiful, bright blue ocean. Then you have something like green, which in a lot of ways could resemble rebirth and life. But then in a different context, like The Matrix, for example, that green hue symbolizes the artificial nature of a digital world. And then what about yellow, which a lot of the times could resemble joy and youthfulness and happiness, could also resemble sickness, madness, or despair. Taking a look at her, warm yellows represent this comfort and warm feeling. But then in Breaking Bad, it represents this sort of moral decay in a way. But what I think is very important here is to think of color as a tool. It's a symbolic way of showing emotion or an undertone of a scene. And even though we just broke down the typical meanings and the possibilities of what these colors can mean, the important thing is to create your own set of rules for each color in your film. Now that we have an idea of what colors could mean or how you could use them in your film, I think that it's important to talk about the overall color palette. And a color palette is the collection of colors that dominate the visual tone of a film or even a single scene. Now, of course, there are a ton of palettes that we could go over, but we're gonna just talk about the three main ones today. And that is monochromatic palettes, like something in The Revenant for their cold blues to evoke this harsh, cold, and desolate environment, or even in Blade Runner with the use of orange representing this dystopian wasteland. Notice that these monochromatic colors really just use shades of one color. Then you have something like analogous color palettes, which use colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. And because these colors are closely related, they naturally harmonize with each other. A great example of this would be this film from Amelie, using the warm greens and reds to create this whimsical, magical realism. And then you have something like a complementary color palette that utilizes colors opposite of each other on the color wheel. And a great example of this would be something like Mad Max Fury Road. They really utilize saturated oranges and teals to create a visual tension, and most importantly, a color contrast that's actually pleasing to the eye. And like I said before, this isn't the only color palettes that are available to use as a filmmaker. There are tons of other color palettes. These are just the ones that are mostly used in film. Now, understanding what colors go well together in a scene is very important, but the other thing that's very important is understanding how much or how little a color should take up in your film. And a common rule of thumb is to use a 60-30-10 color rule. And what this means is that you have a primary color that takes up about 60% of the color in your frame. Then you have something like a secondary color that takes up about 30% of your frame. And then you have something like an accent color that takes up about 10% of your frame. Let's take a look at this scene from The Substance. There are three very distinct colors in the scene, and they follow this sort of 60-30-10 rule to create a sense of color balance in the scene. As you guys can see, the primary color in this frame is white, which takes up about more or less 60% of the frame. Then the secondary color in this scene is this red color from the door. Now, pay close attention because a very important color that they chose to use is the color blue. And this takes up about 10% of the frame. However, our character is wearing blue, which makes them stand out from the background, giving a very nice pop of color and contrast between her and the background. And if you really start to notice at frames in different films, you'll start to understand that a lot of films follow this 60-30-10 rule. Taking a look at this scene right here, they follow the same rule. You have 60% of the blue sky, 30% of the green from the palm trees, and 10% from our accent color, which is pink. And I find it pretty funny, actually, that if you notice most of the time, our accent color, which takes up about 10% of the frame, is often used in the wardrobe of our character. But the important note here is that this sort of rule, again, while you don't have to follow exactly 60-30-10 in your frame, it's important to think about as you're building each scene and each frame in your film, because it allows you to have a sense of color balance or understanding how to put together the color palette in a frame. As a filmmaker, cybersecurity is one of the last things I ever want to worry about. However, when I was shooting down in Mexico City, my Dropbox was hacked. Luckily, I figured everything out and I didn't lose anything, but when you're in the middle of shooting on location and sharing sensitive files, this is the last thing that you guys want to worry about. But the question is, how do you protect yourself? Well, that's where CyberGhost VPN comes in. CyberGhost VPN is a virtual private network, and it's a powerful tool for filmmakers because it encrypts your internet connection, preventing cyber threats and data breaches. CyberGhost has over 11,000 servers, which allows me to upload my large video files without any interruptions, even when I'm uploading 4K footage to the cloud. Now, the other cool thing about having a VPN is being able to access content that's restricted in other locations. A VPN can allow you to access platforms like YouTube, Vimeo, Google Docs, and any other essential platforms needed for your film production. A VPN hides your identity and location, preventing tracking from advertisers, authorities, or competitors. And what's great about CyberGhost is it's actually one of the most affordable VPN services on the market, with a monthly cost of just $13 or $56 for 2 years of service. In my opinion, CyberGhost is a great option if you guys are looking for a VPN service, and if you're interested, I'll leave a link down below. Saturation and brightness is also a very important factor when you guys are considering color in your frame. Saturation refers to how vivid or how muted a color is, while brightness relates to how light or dark a color is. And together they create an emotional atmosphere for a scene. For example, let's take the Joker. Arthur's costume design is insanely saturated to make him pop against a bleak city. It mirrors his growing detachment from society around him. But visually, what's really interesting here is that it allows to separate himself from the background and really pop off the frame. Now, if you take a movie like Saving Private Ryan, for example, they use really muted, desaturated colors across most of the film to showcase this harsh, stark reality of warfare that feels very grounded and gritty. Now, if you want a good representation of brightness, taking a look at the Batman, it shows you how they use low light visuals to reinforce a feeling of claustrophobia and danger. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you take a look at the Grand Budapest Hotel, it is very bright and saturated, feeding into the theme of this kind of whimsical, magical feeling that Wes Anderson is known for conveying in a lot of his films. I think a big question when it comes to color is, how do you plan on using color in your film, and how do you go about implementing all of these ideas? Well, that's something where a color script comes into play. Now, what a color script is a pre-visualization tool used by filmmakers to map out the emotional tone or an entire film specifically through color. And this could be extremely helpful in determining how things like brightness, saturation, or color tones can help shape the mood and evolve through the storytelling of the film. For example, Pixar Up uses vibrant, bright colors during Carl and Allie's early life. Then it shifts to dull gray tones after Ellie's passing. So I think for you guys, it's important to understand and map out how the story evolves, not only through the script, but also through color, and how you guys can use either high saturation or low saturation or bright colors or duller colors throughout your film to help elevate and really give the undertone of the story that you're trying to tell. Now, we've touched on this a little bit already, but something that is very important is something called color contrast. What I personally like to do in my scenes is I read the script and I digest what the story is and what it is that we're trying to tell. And then I figure out what the overall purpose is and what my character's reason and purpose is. And I try to understand the symbolic meaning underneath all of it and what we're really trying to say. Now, I think a great example of this is this scene from my film, The Divide. In this scene, my character wakes up in the middle of the desert with no rhyme or reason behind it. And there were a few goals here. Number one, I really wanted my character to visually stand out from the background. That means that I needed to use color contrast to separate him from the other colors in the natural environment. From a storytelling perspective, I deliberately chose clothing that felt unnatural, colors that had no connection to the surrounding and the desert environment. I immediately wanted the audience to figure out that emotionally and physically, he does not belong in this location. Taking the character and dressing him in a black suit makes him stand out and pop from the background because there is no black anywhere in this location. It is bright blues, tans, and there is a bit of green around him. And I think what this does is visually show the audience how unprepared he is for the trials ahead, and that survival here will demand him to kind of transform. Now, by the end of the scene, my character takes off the jacket, takes off his shirt, and the skin tone is a little bit closer to the golden hour look of the sky and the sun and the rock around him, which kind of visually blends him into the environment, showcasing this transformation. Most people won't really look too deeply into, but I think subconsciously the audience looks at something and they're feeling it even without someone directly telling them what it is. So I think that it's important to ask yourself, what is the intention of the scene, and what is my character's role in the scene, and how does the color affect the overall story that you're trying to tell? I want to thank CyberGhost VPN for being today's sponsor, and if you guys are interested in trying out their service, I'll leave a link down below. Now, if you guys are interested in learning more about filmmaking, my team and I are putting together a filmmaking course breaking down our entire process from concept to final edit and everything else in between. And if you guys are interested, I'll leave a link down below. You guys can visit the site, sign up for the email list, and be notified as soon as the course drops. I want to thank you guys so much for stopping in and hanging out. My name is Alex Zarfati, and I'll see you guys next week. Deuces.